They say the silence before a storm is the most terrifying, but there is a silence more profound, more unsettling. It is the silence of a person who has endured for too long, a person who has absorbed every blow, every sacrifice, into the marrow of their bones. Because when they finally break that silence, it is not with words, but with thunder. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over Napa Valley, filtering through the ancient oak trees that stood sentinel over the Thornton estate. It was a wedding torn from the pages of a magazine, a symphony of white roses, crystal glasses, and quiet, immense wealth. From her seat in the front row, Alara watched her brother, Liam, standing at the altar. At 25, he was impossibly handsome, his future as bright and promising as the California sky above. A deep, aching pride swelled in her chest, so powerful it almost hurt. She had done this. Every line of his expensive suit, every confident smile he gave his new bride, Chloe, was a testament to her life's work. When their parents were stolen from them in a wreck of twisted metal and shattered glass, she was 15 and he was 5. She had traded her own youth, her scholarships, her dreams for his. And standing here today, seeing him on the precipice of a brilliant new life, she believed every sacrifice had been worth it. The reception was even more opulent. After the first dance, the time came for the speeches. The best man told a few charming stories, Chloe's father spoke with affection, and then it was Liam's turn. He took the microphone, the crowd falling into a hush. His eyes swept the room, and for a fleeting moment, they met Alara's. She gave him a small, watery smile, her heart ready to burst. He smiled back, then his gaze shifted, moving to the head table, where it settled on his new mother-in-law, the formidable matriarch, Isabella Thornton. "There are so many people to thank," Liam began, his voice smooth and confident. "But there is one person here, without whom none of this would be possible. I want to dedicate this moment to the woman who truly made me the man I am today, the one who saw potential in me, who taught me the meaning of family, of ambition, who shaped me." He paused, letting the anticipation build. Alara's hands were clasped together, her knuckles white. This was it. The acknowledgement of 20 years of her life. Liam raised his glass. "Mother Isabella," he projected, his voice ringing with profound gratitude. "Thank you for raising me." The words struck Alara with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs. Around her, the room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, capturing Isabella's gracious, proprietary smile. But Alara heard nothing. She saw nothing. The world had narrowed to a single point of unbearable pain. He hadn't just forgotten her. He had replaced her. In one sentence, in front of everyone who mattered, Liam had taken the entire history of her life, her sacrifice, and handed it to another woman as a gift. She was no longer his sister, his guardian, his savior. She was just a ghost, a stranger seated in the front row of a life she had single-handedly built. No one noticed her leave. In a universe of 1,000 glittering moments, the quiet exit of a lone woman was less than a whisper. Alara moved through the manicured gardens like a phantom, the cheerful music and laughter of the wedding reception fading behind her, replaced by the frantic thumping of her own heart. The engine of her modest, 10-year-old sedan started with a familiar, comforting rumble, the only thing in this new, fractured world that still made sense. She drove away from the Thornton estate, away from the life she had built, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white peaks in the dim light of the dashboard. The 20-mile drive back to her small house, their childhood house, was a journey through a fog of disbelief. The familiar landmarks of her town, the corner store, the old movie theater, the park where she taught Liam to throw a baseball, all seemed alien, as if she were seeing them through a stranger's eyes. She unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was silent, holding its breath. It smelled of old books and lemon polish, the scent of her entire life. On the mantelpiece, a photograph smiled back at her. A 15-year-old Alara with tired eyes and a forced smile, holding the hand of a 5-year-old Liam with a gap in his teeth. The day after the funeral, the day their world ended and hers began. Her legs gave way and she sank onto the worn floral armchair, the one their mother had loved, and the past came for her, not as a gentle wave of nostalgia, but as a tidal wave, pulling her under. She was 15 again, the air thick with the sterile, antiseptic smell of the hospital. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was a cruel metronome, counting down the final seconds of her childhood. Her mother's hand was cold in hers, her voice a fragile wisp of sound. "Promise me, Elara," she had whispered, her eyes pleading. "Promise me, you'll look after your brother. Don't let them separate you. Raise him to be a good man." Elara had nodded, tears streaming down her face, the word promise sealing her fate like a vow. It was a promise she kept with the ferocity of a soldier. The acceptance letter from the Art Institute, with a full scholarship, was the first thing she sacrificed. She could still remember the feel of the thick, expensive paper, the smell of the ink. She had dreamed of painting, of creating, but dreams were a luxury she could no longer afford. Instead of art supplies, she bought groceries. Instead of lecture halls, she learned the geography of restaurant kitchens and the fastest way to bus a table during the dinner rush. Her life became a frantic montage of work. She was a waitress at the local diner from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, the smell of coffee and grease clinging to her clothes. Then, she would race to her tutoring gig, helping wealthy kids with the very subjects she had once excelled at. On weekends, she cleaned houses, her hands, which had once dreamed of holding a paintbrush, growing rough and calloused from bleach and scouring pads. Every dollar, every ounce of her energy was funneled into Liam. While she wore shoes until the soles wore thin, he had the best sneakers for basketball. While she ate instant noodles over the sink, he had healthy, home-cooked meals packed for school. She paid for his tutors, his sports camps, his class trips. She was his mother, his father, his provider, his staunchest defender. Her world, once filled with the potential for art and literature and love, had shrunk to the 4 walls of their small house and the singular, all-consuming goal of Liam's success and happiness. She never dated. Who had the time? Who had the energy to explain the strange, stunted life she led? Men would see a tired woman in her 20s who lived for her little brother, and they would politely move on. Her friends from high school went to college, got married, had children of their own. They sent Christmas cards with smiling family photos, and Elara would stick them on the fridge, a painful reminder of a life she was not living. But there were moments of pure, unadulterated joy that made it all feel worth it. The memory of Liam's small hand in hers as they walked to his first day of kindergarten. The endless nights she sat by his bed, placing cool cloths on his forehead when a fever raged. The eruption of pride when he won the state science fair, his project a sophisticated model rocket that they had built together on their living room floor with cardboard and glue. She remembered the day she taught him to ride his bike, her back aching as she ran behind him, holding the seat, until finally she let go, and he soared down the sidewalk, his laughter echoing in the summer air. That feeling, the feeling of watching him succeed, was the sun she oriented her entire life around. His high school graduation was the proudest day of her life. As he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, she had wept silently in the audience, not with sadness for her own lost chances, but with overwhelming love for the brilliant young man she had raised. Now, sitting in the crushing silence of the house, those memories turned to poison in her veins. The pride she felt was a lie. The joy was a phantom. His laughter on the day he learned to ride his bike now sounded like a mockery. His graduation speech, where he had called her his rock, now felt like a calculated performance. She looked at the photograph on the mantel again. She saw the tired girl and the innocent boy. She had protected that boy, nurtured him, given him the very marrow of her youth. And in return, he had taken the finished product, this polished, successful man, and presented him as the creation of another. The silence in the house was no longer comforting. It was the sound of a vacuum, the sound of 20 years of her life being rendered meaningless. The love hadn't just died, it had been murdered, and she had just witnessed the execution. The house was no longer a home. It was a museum of her own foolishness, a monument to a love that was utterly, devastatingly one-sided. For 3 days, Elara existed in a state of suspended animation. She moved through the rooms of her house with the slow, aimless drift of a ghost, the echo of Liam's words a constant hum beneath the surface of her thoughts. The shock had coated her heart in a thick layer of ice, numbing her to the full depth of the wound. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She simply was. She would pick up a book and stare at the same page for an hour, the words marching before her eyes without meaning. She would stand at the kitchen sink, her hands under the running water, feeling nothing. It was as if her soul had retreated to a distant corner of her mind, refusing to engage with a reality that was too monstrous to comprehend. The world outside, with its sunshine and traffic and ringing phones, felt like a movie she was no longer a part of. On the fourth day, the mail arrived. Tucked between a grocery store flyer and a credit card offer was a crisp, cream-colored envelope. It was a certified letter, demanding a signature, its official weight and texture feeling alien and ominous in her hand. She signed for it, her fingers clumsy, and carried it inside. Sitting at the worn oak table where she had helped Liam with his homework for more than a decade, she slid it open. The document inside was dense with legal jargon, a forest of words like heretofore, whereas, and premises. But 3 words, printed in bold, capitalized letters, leaped out at her, clear and brutal. Notice to vacate. For a moment, she was certain it was a mistake, a bureaucratic error. They had the wrong address, the wrong person. A frantic energy, the first real feeling in days, surged through her. She scrambled to the old metal lockbox in her father's study, the one that held all their important documents. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the key, the contents spilling onto the dusty desk. Birth certificates, social security cards, and a thick folder labeled Deed and Title. She ripped it open, her eyes scanning the pages, searching for her name, for the comforting proof of her ownership. She found it, and then she found his. And she found the other document, tucked neatly behind the original deed. A quitclaim deed, dated 4 years ago, on Liam's 21st birthday. The memory hit her with the force of a physical impact. Liam, home from college for the weekend, had presented the papers to her with a casual smile. "It's just some legal stuff the family lawyer said we should do," he'd explained, his tone light and reassuring. "It puts the house solely in my name to simplify the estate in case, something ever happens. It makes inheritance cleaner." It's just a formality, Alara. She had trusted him. She had always trusted him. Why wouldn't she? She had looked at his earnest, familiar face, the face she had washed and fed and loved for a lifetime, and she had signed where he pointed, her signature, a swift, thoughtless act of love and trust. And now, stapled to that document, was another. A grant deed, dated 2 weeks before his wedding, transferring full ownership of the property at 125 Elm Street from Liam Miller to the Thornton Family Trust. It was all there, in black and white. A premeditated campaign of dispossession. The wedding hadn't been the betrayal. It had merely been the announcement that the betrayal was complete. A desperate, primal need to hear his voice, to hear him explain this away as some terrible misunderstanding, seized her. She snatched her phone, her thumb hovering over his contact photo, a smiling picture of them from his college graduation. She pressed call. It rang once, then went silent. A cold, automated voice spoke in her ear. "The person you are calling is not accepting calls at this time." She tried again and again. The same digital wall. He had blocked her. The finality of it was absolute. Panic gave way to a cold, rising fury. He could not hide from her behind a blocked number. The next morning, she drove to the city, to the gleaming steel and glass monolith that was the headquarters of Thornton Corp. This was his new world, the world he had chosen over her. Dressed in her simple jeans and a worn sweater, she felt like a ghost haunting a palace. The lobby was a vast expanse of marble and hushed efficiency. The receptionist, a young woman with a flawless smile and an earpiece, looked at her with polite condescension. "May I help you?" "I'm here to see Liam Miller," Alara said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I'm his sister." The receptionist's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. She typed something into her computer. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Miller is in a meeting and has left strict instructions not to be disturbed. He has no appointments scheduled with an Alara." The use of her name, clinical and detached, felt like another small stab. It's a family emergency, Alara insisted, her voice rising slightly. I need to see him. If you'd like to leave a message. The receptionist began, but Alara was already walking past the desk toward the bank of elevators. She didn't get 5 feet before 2 security guards, large men in crisp black suits, stepped into her path. They didn't touch her, but their presence was an immovable wall. Ma'am, the taller one said, his voice low and devoid of emotion, you're going to have to leave. Now. I'm his sister, she repeated, her voice cracking with a mixture of rage and humiliation. The few people milling about the lobby were now staring, their faces a mixture of curiosity and disdain. She was a scene, a disruption in their perfect, orderly world. Please don't make us escort you out, the guard said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Defeated, shamed, and utterly powerless, Alara turned and walked out, the automatic glass doors hissing shut behind her. Standing on the busy city sidewalk, with thousands of people rushing past, she had never felt more alone. The last, desperate hope she had clung to that this was all Isabella's doing, that Liam was somehow a victim too, died right there on that cold pavement. This was his choice. This fortress of wealth was what he defended, and she was the intruder. There was one last thread to pull. A small joint savings account they had maintained since Liam started college. It was her emergency fund, a buffer she had painstakingly built from stray tips and overtime pay. It wasn't much, just over $5,000, but it was all she had in the world. As soon as she got home, she logged into her online banking portal, her heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She clicked on the account details. The page loaded, and she stared. Current balance, $0. She clicked on the transaction history. There was only one recent entry, dated 3 days before the wedding. A wire transfer for the entire balance of the account, authorized by Liam A. Miller. He hadn't just taken her future, he had taken her past. Every extra hour she'd worked, every sleepless night, every small denial of self, he had taken it all, converted it into cash, and wiped the slate clean. He hadn't just pushed her out of the house, he had stripped it bare and set it on fire. The numbness that had encased her heart for days finally cracked, but it was not grief that poured out, it was ice. A cold, clear, unadulterated resolve. They thought they had erased her. They had no idea they had just created her. To understand the cruelty of the act, one must first understand the architect. Isabella Thornton did not consider herself a cruel woman. In her world, a world of inherited wealth, strategic alliances, and bloodlines that stretched back to the steel barons of a bygone era, her actions were not cruel. They were necessary. They were acts of curation. One curated art collections, wine cellars, and, most importantly, family histories. Liam was a promising, if unpolished, acquisition for her daughter. He was handsome, intelligent, and malleable. But he came with an attachment, a loose thread from a past she found distasteful. And Isabella Thornton always trimmed the loose threads. Her study, overlooking the sprawling Thornton vineyards, was a reflection of her mind, orderly, expensive, and devoid of clutter. Not a single photograph was out of place. Not a book on the mahogany shelves was misaligned. It was from this serene command center that she had orchestrated the systematic dismantling of Alara's life. She remembered the first conversation she'd had with Liam about his sister, 3 months before the wedding. He was sitting opposite her in a plush leather armchair that seemed to swallow his still boyish frame, nervously sipping a glass of water. Alara is a remarkable woman. Isabella had begun, her voice a soft, cultured purr. She chose the word remarkable carefully, the way one might describe a curiosity. To have dedicated her entire life to you, it's a story of almost biblical sacrifice. Liam had nodded, a swell of pride in his eyes. She's the most selfless person I know. She gave up everything for me. Yes, Isabella had said, letting the word hang in the air. She did. And now, my dear boy, you must give her a gift in return. You must give her her life back. Liam looked confused, and Isabella leaned forward, her expression a mask of maternal concern. A woman like that, her identity is entirely wrapped up in yours. Her sacrifice has become her cage, As long as you are dependent on her, or she on you, she will never be free to become her own person. She has earned the right to a life that does not revolve around being Liam's sister. It was a masterful stroke, reframing abandonment as emancipation. She was not asking him to discard Alara. She was asking him to liberate her. She planted the first seed of doubt, suggesting that his continued connection to his sister was, in fact, a form of selfishness. Over the following weeks, she nurtured that seed. She would make casual, cutting remarks disguised as sympathy. "I do hope Alara finds a hobby, a passion of her own one day." Or, "It's such a shame she never finished her education." A mind like that, left to stagnate. She painted Alara's sacrifice, not as a badge of honor, but as a mark of a life unlived, a quiet failure. The next step was to present the alternative. She and her husband had built an empire, not just of wealth, but of influence. She introduced Liam to a world he had only read about. Weekends were spent on yachts, dinners were attended by senators, vacations were taken in Swiss chalets. She showed him the machinery of real power. "This is a family, Liam," she told him one evening, gesturing at a table of powerful associates. "Not just blood, but a network, an entity. We protect our own, we elevate our own. Alara gave you a childhood, we are offering you a dynasty." He was intoxicated by it. The boy who grew up on reheated casseroles was now dining on cuisine prepared by private chefs. The boy whose sister worked 3 jobs was now surrounded by people who had never worked a day in their lives. The shame of his humble beginnings, a shame he never knew he had, began to fester, skillfully stoked by Isabella. Alara became a symbol of that past, a walking, breathing reminder of the life he was so desperate to escape. The final act was the financial severing. Isabella approached it with the dispassionate logic of a corporate merger. She had her lawyers draft the papers concerning the house. She presented them to Liam in her study, the documents laid out on the polished desk like a treaty. "He's defending her again," he had protested, though his voice was weaker this time. "That's our home. It was our parents' home." "It was," Isabella corrected gently. "But you are no longer the boy who lived there. You are to be a Thornton, and the assets of a Thornton must be protected. Think of it as consolidation. We bring everything under the umbrella of the family trust. It's cleaner, safer. It protects you from outside liabilities." The unspoken words hung in the air. Alara is an outside liability. This isn't about taking something from her, Liam. It's about securing your future. Her name on that deed is an anchor to a past you are leaving behind. And in our world, my boy, we sail yachts. We don't drag anchors. She made it sound not only logical, but sophisticated. Betrayal was rebranded as savvy estate planning. He was being initiated into the cold, pragmatic world of the truly wealthy, and he was desperate to prove he belonged. He took the papers. A week later, he brought them back, signed. The matter of the small savings account was even simpler. "A joint account is a vulnerability," Isabella had stated, as if discussing the weather. "It implies a connection that is no longer primary. Your primary connection now is to Chloe, to this family. The funds should be moved into your personal portfolio. It's simply good housekeeping." Liam was not merely a pawn, he was a willing participant. Isabella had offered him a narrative where he was not an ungrateful brother, but a man making wise, mature choices for his future. She gave him permission to be selfish and called it strength. She allowed him to trade loyalty for legacy and called it ambition. He accepted her terms eagerly, because the guilt of what he owed Alara was a weight he was desperate to set down. By erasing her, he could absolve himself of that debt. And so, when he stood at that wedding altar, the words he spoke were not entirely Isabella's. They were his own. He looked at Isabella Thornton and thanked her for raising him because, in the world he now chose to inhabit, she had. She had birthed the man he wanted to be, a man untethered, powerful, and free from the inconvenient memory of the woman who had given everything to create him. As she watched from her seat, Isabella felt a quiet satisfaction. A stray branch had been pruned. The family tree was now perfect. The days that followed were a blur of cardboard boxes and the tearing sound of packing tape. The eviction notice gave her 30 days. 30 days to dismantle a life. to pack away 20 years of memories that had curdled into evidence of her own folly. Each object she touched was a fresh torment. She found a box of Liam's childhood drawings, a crayon rendering of their house with 2 stick figures, labeled, "My best sister and me." She dropped it into a box for donation without a second thought. She packed away his school trophies, the rows of cheap plastic and faux marble that had once been her proudest display, now feeling like monuments to a stranger. This was the hardest part, the realization that she was not just mourning a relationship, she was mourning a person who had never truly existed. The loving brother she remembered was a fiction she had co-authored, and the real Liam was the man who had blocked her number and emptied her bank account. Despair was a heavy blanket, threatening to smother her. Some mornings, she couldn't find the will to get out of bed, the sheer scale of her loss too vast to face. The house, once her sanctuary, now felt like a tomb, and she was its unwilling custodian, tasked with sorting through the artifacts of a dead life. She decided to start with her parents' room, a space she had kept largely untouched, a shrine to people she barely remembered. In the back of her father's closet, behind a row of his old suits that still faintly smelled of him, she found a heavy wooden footlocker she hadn't seen in years. It wasn't locked. Inside, nestled amongst old college textbooks and photo albums, was a series of thick, leather-bound journals. Her father, an architect, had been a meticulous record keeper. His handwriting was a precise, angular script that she recognized from the notes he used to leave on her pillow. She pulled one out, the date on the first page, just a few months before the crash, and set the box aside, too emotionally exhausted to delve into it just yet. It was in the middle of this bleak excavation, on a particularly gray afternoon, that the doorbell rang. Standing on her porch was David Chen, a man she hadn't seen in nearly a decade. He had been her father's best friend and their family's lawyer. He was older now, his hair completely silver, but his eyes were still as sharp and kind as she remembered. "Alara," he said, his voice full of a gentle sorrow. "I heard what happened at the wedding and with the house. I came as soon as I could." She let him in, a wave of relief so potent it almost brought her to tears. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't completely alone. She made him tea, and they sat amongst the boxes in the living room. She told him everything, the words pouring out of her in a torrent of pain and confusion. He listened patiently, his expression growing darker with every detail. When she finished, he was silent for a long time, staring at a photograph of her parents on the mantelpiece. "Your father was a good man," David said finally, his voice low. Honest, stubborn as a mule when it came to his principles. Maybe too honest for the company he was starting to keep. "What do you mean?" Alara asked. David sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "Alara, there's something I've carried with me for 20 years. A doubt, a feeling that never sat right. The police report on your parents' accident was clean. Brake failure on a rain-slicked road. A tragic, random event. But I never believed it was random." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "Just before he died, your father was in a major dispute. He was the lead architect on a huge commercial development project. He came to me, said his partners were cutting corners, using substandard materials, falsifying safety reports to fast-track the build. He was preparing to blow the whistle, to file an injunction that would have cost the developers millions, maybe even sent people to jail." Alara felt a cold chill creep up her spine. "He never mentioned any of that to me." "You were a child," David said gently. "He wanted to protect you. I was helping him put the case file together. He had documents, recordings, proof. We were supposed to meet the Monday after the weekend they died. He never made it. After the accident, I tried to follow up, but I was stonewalled. The company brought in their own legal team. The files your father kept at his office vanished. The project went ahead with a new architect. There was nothing I could do without proof." Ilara's mind was racing, connecting disparate points of light in a vast darkness. Her father's integrity, his stubbornness, the suddenness of his death. A question formed on her lips, a question she was almost too afraid to ask. "David, who were the developers? What was the name of the company?" David Chen looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, 20-year-old anger. It was a family-run corporation, ruthless even back then. They were just starting to build their empire. The company was Thornton Corp. The name struck her like lightning. Thornton. The name that had been spoken from the altar, the name that was on her eviction notice, the name that had stolen her brother. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern, a terrible, suffocating web that had been woven around her life long before she was even aware of it. She stood up, her movements stiff, and walked to the wooden footlocker she had pulled from the closet. She lifted the heavy journal she had taken out earlier, her father's journal from the last year of his life. Her fingers, trembling, opened it to a random page. His familiar script filled the entry, detailing stress over structural integrity calculations. And then she saw it, underlined twice in red ink. A sentence that made the blood in her veins run cold. Final confrontation with Thornton tomorrow. He will not listen to reason. He threatened to remove any obstacle. I have everything recorded. She looked up at David, the journal held tightly in her hands. The grief, the despair, the suffocating sense of loss that had plagued her for weeks began to recede. In its place, something new and hard and cold began to form. A purpose. The boxes around her were no longer symbols of a life that was over. They were an archive. The house was no longer a home she was losing. It was a crime scene. Liam's betrayal wasn't a separate, random act of cruelty. It was the final chapter of a story that had begun 20 years ago, with a threat and a set of faulty brakes on a rainy night. Hope flickered within her, but it was not a warm and gentle flame. It was the cold blue fire of a gas stove, waiting to be lit. They had tried to bury the truth with her parents. They had tried to erase her history. They would not succeed. The 30-day deadline on the eviction notice no longer felt like a death sentence. It felt like a timer. The house transformed. The chaotic piles of boxes, once monuments to her grief, were now organized and labeled with a new, sharp precision. Her living room ceased to be a place of mourning and became a war room. The coffee table disappeared under a sea of her father's architectural drawings, legal pads filled with her own frantic notes, and the open, time-worn pages of his journals. The air, which had been thick with despair, now crackled with a new, focused intensity. This was not a woman packing up her past. This was an archaeologist excavating a crime. David Chen became her anchor and her guide. He would arrive every morning with a thermos of strong coffee and a box of pastries, sustenance for the long days ahead. With his legal mind and steadying presence, he helped her navigate the labyrinth of her father's life's work. He taught her the language of contracts, the subtleties of zoning laws, and the cold calculus of corporate malfeasance. He was the calm voice of reason that tempered her raw, burning need for answers. Together, they began to piece together the final months of Mark Miller's life, not through the hazy lens of a daughter's memory, but through the precise, factual record he had left behind. The journals were the key. Reading them was an intimate and painful experience for Alara. She was meeting her father for the first time, not as the dad who pushed her on a swing set, but as Mark Miller, a man of fierce integrity trapped in an impossible situation. His early entries about the Northgate Plaza project were filled with professional excitement. He wrote of elegant design solutions and the challenge of a difficult landscape. But as the months wore on, the tone began to darken. The clean, confident script grew tighter, more agitated. October 12th, she read aloud to David one night, the lamplight casting long shadows across the room. Another battle over the steel reinforcements. Thornton's supplier sent a shipment that's 20% below the specified tensile strength. I rejected it. Got a call from Thornton Sr. himself. He didn't yell. He was worse. He was calm. He spoke about budgets and timelines as if the laws of physics were minor inconveniences. I told him the building's integrity would be compromised. He told me my job was to find a way to make it work, not to create problems. Page after page, the story unfolded. Falsified soil reports to avoid the expense of deeper foundations, pressure to approve electrical plans that bypassed crucial safety protocols. Mark had fought back at every turn, documenting every shortcut, every lie. He wasn't just an architect, he was the sole guardian of the safety of thousands of future occupants of a building that his partners were actively trying to sabotage for profit. The personal toll was evident. November 3rd. I think they're having me followed. A dark sedan has been parked across the street for 2 days. When I leave, it leaves. Am I going crazy? Paranoia is the price of honesty in this town. A week later, Isabella Thornton was at the site today with her husband. She never speaks, just watches. She looked at me, not like a person, but like an obstacle, like a rock in a stream that needs to be cleared. Alara felt a strange and powerful connection to this man she barely knew. His fight was now her fight. His integrity was a legacy she had to honor. She spent hours at the public library, her eyes burning from the harsh light of the microfiche reader, scrolling through old newspapers from that year. She found articles heralding the announcement of the Northgate Plaza, with a smiling photograph of a younger, more vital-looking Arthur Thornton Sr., his arm around her father. Seeing his face, the face of the man who had threatened her father and whose family had destroyed her own, sent a tremor of pure hatred through her. The breakthrough came late one night, deep into the third journal. Alara was exhausted, her vision blurring. David had gone home hours ago, urging her to rest. But she couldn't stop. She felt she was on the verge of something. And then she found it. An entry, dated the week before the accident, written with a hurried, almost frantic scrawl. Met with JR today. He's a junior accountant at Thornton Corp., terrified for his job, his family. But he's a good kid. He sees it too. The fraudulent invoices, the payments to shell companies, to hide the cheap materials. He's been making copies, smuggling them out of the office a few pages at a time. He says he has everything. He's hidden it all. Said if anything happens to me, I should know to look for his celestial insurance policy. He was so nervous, he was talking in code. He just kept repeating, "Remember Orion's belt, Mark. Just look for Orion's belt." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. JRA name. A person. Orion's belt. A code. It wasn't just a general accusation anymore. It was a thread. A single, tangible thread she could pull. She grabbed a fresh legal pad and wrote the information down in bold, block letters, J.R., accounting, Orion's belt. She looked around the room, at the stacks of her father's life, at the evidence of his courage. The crushing weight of her own personal betrayal by Liam seemed to shrink in comparison to the scale of this older, darker crime. Liam had tried to erase her past, to make her small and insignificant, but he had failed. Instead, he had inadvertently led her to the one thing that could make her powerful: the truth. Sitting there, in the pre-dawn quiet of the house that would soon no longer be hers, Alara felt no fear. She felt no despair. She felt the cold, thrilling certainty of a hunter who has just found the tracks. Her father had left her a map, and now she would follow it, no matter where it led. The two clues felt both monumental and insignificant: JR and Orion's belt. They were everything, and they were nothing. For the next week, Alara and David fell into a rhythm of methodical, often frustrating, investigation. The house, with its looming eviction date, became their base of operations. They started with the logical steps. They combed through online professional networks and old alumni databases from local universities, searching for accountants with the initials JR, who would have been at the right age 20 years ago. The search yielded hundreds of names, a digital haystack with no discernible needle. Trying to get official employment records from Thornton Corp was, as David predicted, a complete dead end. They were met with a polite but impenetrable wall of corporate privacy policy. The puzzle of Orion's belt proved even more vexing. They brainstormed for hours, their ideas scribbled on a large whiteboard David had brought over. Was it a password to a hidden digital file? Unlikely, given the technology of the time. An astronomy club? A search of local community records turned up nothing. A password for a safe deposit box? Impossible to trace without a bank and a name. The dead ends were beginning to pile up, and with each one, Alara felt a sliver of the old despair creeping back in. The breakthrough, when it came, was not a lightning bolt of genius, but a quiet flicker of memory. Alara was rereading one of her father's earlier journals, one from before the Thornton Project, trying to understand his habits, his routines. She found a passing entry about a difficult negotiation on a previous job. Finally got the contractor to agree. He had written. Met him for a drink to seal the deal. Sometimes the best business gets done in the worst dive bars. A new thought ignited in her mind. It wasn't a code. It wasn't a club. It was a place. A place to meet. A dive bar. The next morning, she was back at the main library, not in the newspaper archives, but in the deep, dusty catacombs of the municipal records department. She requested the business directories and phone books for the city, spanning a 5-year period around the time of her father's death. The volumes were heavy and smelled of decaying paper. With a patience she didn't know she possessed, she began to scan the columns, her finger tracing the endless lists of businesses under bars, taverns, and lounges. 3 hours into her search, her finger stopped. There it was, tucked between an O'Reilly's Pub and an Oasis Grill. Orion's Belt Lounge, 452 West Industrial Avenue. A quick search on her phone showed that the entire industrial district had been razed and redeveloped 10 years ago. The bar was long gone, replaced by a row of sterile-looking condos. It was another dead end, but this time, Alara refused to accept it. With David's help, she pulled the old property records for that address. The owner of the building that housed the bar was a small, family-owned LLC. Cross-referencing that with current records, they found the name of the man who had run the LLC, a Mr. Marcus Petrov, who now owned a quiet little bookstore on the other side of town. Marcus Petrov was a stout man in his late 70s with a warm smile and ink stains on his fingers. He remembered the bar well. The Belt? Oh yeah, a real dive. Dark, sticky floors, mostly regulars from the factories and the few corporate offices in the area. Ilara's heart was pounding. We're trying to find someone who used to go there. An accountant, probably in his late 20s back then. His name might have been John, or James, or something starting with a J. Marcus squinted, stroking his chin. Accountant, quiet type, always looked like a scared rabbit, sat in the corner booth, nursed one beer for 2 hours. Ilara nodded eagerly. Yeah, I remember him. Johnny Reed. He used to meet with another guy sometimes, a real sharp, dressed fella, looked like an architect or something. Jonathan Reed, Jr. They had a name. It took them another 2 days of cross-referencing public records, old voter registrations, and DMV data, but they found him. He lived in a small, meticulously neat suburban house 60 miles away, the kind of place a person could disappear into. Alara knew she had to go alone. This was too delicate for David's legal presence. She drove to the address on a Saturday morning. She found Jonathan Reed in his front yard, methodically washing a sensible sedan. He was a man in his late 40s now, with thinning hair and a soft, gentle face, but his eyes, when he looked up at her approach, were the same eyes of the scared rabbit Marcus Petrov had described. "Mr. Jonathan Reed?" she asked, her voice calm. "Yes, can I help you?" He was polite but wary. "My name is Ilara Miller. My father was Mark Miller." The change was instantaneous and profound. The color drained from his face. The car sponge fell from his hand, landing on the driveway with a wet slap. For a moment, he looked like he might run. I don't know who that is," he stammered, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. "You must have the wrong person." "Please," Alara said, taking a step closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Don't. My father wrote about you. He trusted you. He said you were a good man." She reached into her bag and pulled out the journal, opened to the page with the final, frantic entry. She held it out to him. "He wrote about Orion's Belt. He wrote that you were brave." Jonathan stared at his name, written in her father's handwriting from 20 years ago. His shoulders, which had been tense and high, suddenly slumped. The fight went out of him, replaced by a weariness that seemed bone deep. He looked up at Alara, and in his eyes, she saw 2 decades of fear and guilt. "Brave," he scoffed, the word a bitter taste in his mouth. "I wasn't brave. I was terrified, and then I was a coward." He dropped his head, his gaze fixed on the concrete. "They fired me a week after the accident, for restructuring. They made it clear I would never work in corporate accounting again." They had me followed for a year. I got the message. He finally met her gaze, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. Your father was the brave one. He was trying to do the right thing, and they killed him for it. It was the first time anyone had said the word aloud. Killed, not an accident, a murder. The confirmation settled in Alara's soul like a block of ice. What happened to the documents, Jonathan? She asked gently. I destroyed them, he admitted, his voice cracking. Years ago, I was so scared they would find them, that they would come for my family. It was too dangerous. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Alara felt a pang of disappointment, but she pushed it away. She hadn't come for a box of papers. She had come for the truth. You can still help, she said. You can tell me everything you remember. You can tell me who was giving the orders. He let out a long, shuddering breath, the breath of a man finally letting go of a burden he had carried for half his life. He looked at her, at the daughter, with the same determined eyes as the father he had failed. Okay, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Come inside. I'll tell you everything. Jonathan Reed's living room was a portrait of a life lived cautiously. Every piece of furniture was perfectly placed. Every surface was dust-free. Every cushion was plumped. It was the home of a man who had seen chaos once and had spent the rest of his life ensuring it would never touch him again. He spoke in a low, hushed voice, as if the walls themselves might be listening, as if Arthur Thornton Sr. might still be lurking in the shadows of his quiet suburban life. The story he told was uglier than anything Alara had imagined. He described a corporate culture built on fear, presided over by a man who viewed human beings as numbers on a spreadsheet. Arthur Thornton didn't just want to be rich, Jonathan explained, his hands wrapped tightly around a mug of untouched coffee. He wanted to build an empire, and he believed the rules of common men didn't apply to him. Your father was the first person with any real authority who ever told him no. Thornton couldn't comprehend it. He saw your father's integrity not as a virtue, but as a personal insult. He detailed the intricate web of deceit. Shell corporations based in Delaware used to purchase the cheap, substandard steel. 2 sets of accounting books, one for the official auditors and one that reflected the grimy reality. Cash payments to city inspectors to look the other way. Jonathan had stumbled upon it by accident, a single invoice that didn't add up, and like a loose thread, he had pulled on it until the entire corrupt tapestry began to unravel in his hands. He had gone to Mark Miller, terrified, and found an ally. But what about the proof? Alara pressed, leaning forward. You said you destroyed your copies. Is it all gone? A strange, sad smile touched Jonathan's lips. I destroyed my copies. Your father. Mark was smarter than all of us. He knew his office wasn't safe. He knew his home could be broken into. A few days before he died, he called me. He told me he was done fighting them on their turf. He was preparing to go to the press. I begged him not to, told him it was too dangerous. He knew, but he said he had an insurance policy. What was it? Alara asked, her voice tight with anticipation. He told me, they can shred every piece of paper in my office, Johnny, but they can't destroy what they don't know exists. He said he had spent a whole weekend scanning every document, every blueprint with his notes, every fraudulent invoice. He digitized everything, and he told me he had a recording of his last phone call with Thornton. Jonathan's eyes met hers, and she saw the ghost of his 20-year-old fear. He said he sent it all somewhere safe, somewhere no one would ever think to look. Alara's mind reeled. A digital archive, a ghost in the machine. Where? Did he say where? That's the thing, Jonathan said, shaking his head. He was cryptic. He just said, I emailed it to the only place that's truly ours. Alara and David drove back in silence, the weight of Jonathan's story settling between them. The only place that's truly ours. What could it mean? A joint safe deposit box? An account with a lawyer? It was Alara who finally broke the silence, a sudden, shocking memory from the dawn of the internet age jolting her. The computer, she whispered. The first computer my dad bought. We were one of the first families on our block to have internet access. He set up an email account. Not for him or for my mom, for the family, for all of us. The hunt began the moment they got back to the house. It was a search for a digital ghost. The internet service provider from that era had been bought out twice and no longer existed. The email domain was defunct. For hours, it seemed hopeless. But David, ever methodical, found a tech forum thread that discussed how to access archived data from extinct email providers. It was possible, but only if they had the exact email address and the password. The address came to Alara in a flash. Her father had been a sentimental space enthusiast, Miller Family Voyage at starmail.net. She could almost hear him saying it, explaining to a 7-year-old Liam that they were a family of explorers. The password was the real wall. Password recovery was impossible. The security questions were lost to time. What was your first pet's name? What was your mother's maiden name? She knew the answers, but the system was gone. They had to remember the password itself. For hours they tried everything. Anniversaries, birthdays, addresses. Nothing worked. The account would lock them out for an hour after every few failed attempts. Exhausted and defeated, Alara sank onto the sofa, her head in her hands. Her gaze fell upon the photograph on the mantel, the one of her and Liam the day after the funeral. Her promise, her entire life's purpose, condensed into one moment. And she remembered what she used to call Liam when he was little, when he would have a nightmare and she would comfort him. Her little star, her constant. She sat up, her heart hammering. She walked to the laptop and typed slowly, deliberately. LIAMMYSTAR. No spaces, all one word. She hit enter. The screen buffered for a moment. And then, an inbox loaded. It was like a tomb from a lost civilization. The interface was clunky, pixelated. The inbox was filled with hundreds of unread emails, junk mail from 20 years ago advertising things that no longer existed. And then she saw it. A single email, near the top of the list, marked as unread, from Mark Miller at arch-design.com. Subject, Northgate file, insurance. Date, October 29th, 2 days before the crash. Her hand was trembling so hard she could barely control the mouse. She clicked it open. The body of the email contained only one sentence. For Alara and Liam, in case the worst happens. The password is the date I promised to always love your mother. There was one attachment, a compressed zip file. It was password protected, the date. She knew it instantly, their wedding anniversary. She typed it in. The file unzipped, revealing a folder containing dozens of neatly organized scans. The fake invoices, the altered blueprints, internal memos, and one small file labeled Audio, Final, Wave. David moved to stand behind her. She double-clicked the file. The room was utterly silent, save for the hum of the computer. Then, a voice filled the space. Her father's voice, clear and steady, laced with exhaustion but full of conviction. Arthur, this is the last time I'm going to say it. The west retaining wall is unsafe. You have to halt construction. Then, another voice. A voice she recognized from news clips and society pages, but this version was stripped of all its public charm. It was flat, reptilian, and cold as a grave. Arthur Thornton Sr. The only thing that is going to be halted is your career, Mark, if you don't sign off on those plans by morning. I'm not signing, her father's voice said, resolute. And I'm going to the press. This is over. There was a short pause. Then Thornton's voice returned, low and lethal, each word a perfectly polished shard of ice. You do that, and you won't live to see the weekend. I will remove you. You are a temporary problem, Mark. And I always, always remove my problems. A sharp click, and then silence. The recording ended, but the threat remained, hanging in the air in the quiet living room, as real and as potent as it had been 20 years ago. Alara stared at the screen, at the name of the audio file. She felt no tears. The time for tears was over. The pain in her heart, the grief for her parents, the sting of Liam's betrayal, it all coalesced and hardened into something new. It was no longer a wound. It was a weapon. She had it now. The truth, in its purest, most undeniable form. The point of no return had been crossed, not 20 years ago on a rain-slicked road, but right now, in this room. The silence that followed the recording was a living thing. It filled the room, heavy and absolute, pressing in on Alara and David. The voice of Arthur Thornton Sr., a ghost from 2 decades past, had laid bare the cold, brutal truth. This was not a case of corporate negligence that led to a tragic accident. This was a premeditated execution, ordered with the same casual indifference one might use to order a cup of coffee. The weapon was now in Alara's hands, a digital ghost story that could scream the truth to the world. The question was no longer what had happened, but how the guilty would pay. David, ever the lawyer, was the first to speak, his voice strained. "We take this to the district attorney, immediately." This recording, coupled with Jonathan Reed's testimony, it's a slam dunk. They can reopen the case. This is enough to get an indictment, at least for conspiracy. Alara looked at him, her expression eerily calm. The emotional storm inside her had passed, leaving behind a landscape of ice. "An indictment," she repeated, the words tasting like ash. "And then what, David? Years of legal battles? The best lawyers money can buy, filing endless motions, discrediting the audio, painting my father as a disgruntled employee. The Thorntons have spent a lifetime manipulating systems. The legal system is just one more that they know how to bend to their will. Justice might be served, eventually, in a quiet courtroom that no one pays attention to. Isabella might end up in a comfortable, minimum security prison, but their name, their legacy, the empire built on my parents' blood, would remain." She stood up and began to pace the room, a predator stalking the confines of a cage. Their greatest asset isn't their money, it's their name, their reputation. The illusion that they are philanthropists, pillars of the community, American royalty. That is their center of gravity. That is what we have to destroy. David saw the terrifying clarity in her eyes. This was no longer the grieving young woman he had come to comfort. This was the daughter of Mark Miller, with all his stubborn integrity forged into something far harder, far more dangerous. "What are you proposing?" he asked, already knowing the answer would frighten him. Alara stopped pacing and looked at the calendar on the wall. A date, 2 weeks away, was circled in red, an invitation that had come in the mail for the house's current resident, a glossy, ostentatious card she had almost thrown away. "The Thornton Family Foundation Annual Legacy Gala," she read aloud. "They are being presented with the city's Philanthropist of the Year award. Everyone will be there. The media, the mayor, their business partners, the entire social elite. They are building a stage to celebrate their own lies. I propose we use it to tell the truth." The plan, as she laid it out, was audacious and terrifyingly precise. It was not a plan for legal justice, but for social annihilation. For the next 2 weeks, the house was no longer a home to be vacated, but a command center for a meticulously planned covert operation. The ticking clock of the eviction notice was replaced by the countdown to the gala. Their first task was ensuring access. The generic invitation was for the cocktail hour only. They needed to be in the main ballroom for the presentation. David, reluctantly at first, but with growing resolve, began to call in favors he hadn't touched in 20 years. He finally secured 2 seats at a table, sponsored by an old colleague from his law firm, a man who owed him a significant debt from their youth. The price was steep, but the tickets were confirmed. Alara's task was to forge the weapon. She spent days at her computer, not as a grieving daughter, but as a masterful storyteller of tragedy. Using simple video editing software, she crafted a short, 3-minute presentation that was brutally effective. It began with the soft, warm glow of old family photos. Her mother and father on their wedding day, a picture of her father holding her as a baby, the 4 of them smiling on a beach. Poignant, instrumental music played underneath. Then, the images shifted to her father's architectural achievements, beautiful buildings set against a blue sky, as text appeared on the screen, quoting the most powerful lines from his journals about integrity and responsibility. The music would then cut out, plunging the video into an abrupt, jarring silence. The screen would go black. And then, the audio would play. Her father's calm, desperate plea, Thornton's cold, reptilian threat. The final, chilling promise. I always remove my problems. The video would end on that silence, holding on the black screen for 3 long, unbearable seconds before fading. It was a masterpiece of emotional warfare, but having the weapon was useless without ensuring it hit the target. They couldn't risk the gala's technicians refusing to play the file. The attack had to be decentralized. Alara researched the city's most tenacious investigative journalists. She found her target, Julian Croft, a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter for a national news outlet, famous for his deep dives into corporate and political corruption. He was relentless and, by all accounts, incorruptible. From a disposable email address at the public library, Alara sent him a single, anonymous message. Mr. Croft, if you are interested in the true foundation of the Thornton family fortune, be at their legacy gala in 2 weeks. A story will break that will define your year. You will know the moment it happens. Simply have your camera ready. She attached no files, offered no proof, just the hook. It was a gamble, but a calculated one. A journalist like Croft lived for hooks like this. The final piece of the plan was Alara herself. She knew she could not walk into that gala looking like a victim. She had to look like she belonged. She had to be invisible until the moment she chose to be seen. She took the last of the emergency cash David had given her and went to a high-end consignment shop. She bought a single dress, a simple, floor-length sheath of dark navy silk. It was elegant, understated, and anonymous. When she tried it on in the store, she stared at her reflection in the mirror. The tired, heartbroken woman who had left Liam's wedding was gone. In her place stood a stranger with her face, a woman whose eyes held no tears, only the cold, hard light of purpose. She was no longer a person. She was an instrument. Her father had left her his integrity, and she had sharpened it into a blade. On the night of the gala, she would walk into the heart of the Thornton Empire, a ghost in a silk dress, and she would deliver the justice he had been denied. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel was a galaxy of manufactured stars. Chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, their light refracting through 1,000 champagne flutes. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, confident hum of power, a sound made by men and women who believed they were the masters of their universe. Alara, in her simple navy dress, moved through the crowd like a whisper of night sky amidst the garish constellations. Beside her, David Chen looked tense, his hand occasionally patting the breast pocket of his tuxedo as if to reassure himself of his own solidity in this den of gilded predators. But Alara felt a preternatural calm. Her heart beat with a slow, steady rhythm. The grief, the rage, the 20 years of pain, it had all been forged and compressed into a single, dense point of purpose. She was not a guest. She was a ghost, returned to haunt the feast. She saw them across the room, holding court near the stage. Isabella Thornton was magnificent, a queen in emerald silk, her smile a dazzling, practiced weapon. Beside her stood Chloe, radiant and blissfully unaware, a perfect porcelain doll. And then she saw Liam. He looked more a Thornton than her brother now, his posture confident, his laughter easy as he shook hands with a city councilman. He had the effortless glow of a man who had arrived. For a brief, vertiginous second, their eyes met across the glittering expanse. She saw a flicker of confusion in his expression, a momentary glitch in his programming, before he turned away, dismissing her as an irrelevant anomaly. Alara felt nothing. Not a pang of lost love, not a sting of betrayal. She felt only a profound and chilling emptiness, the way an astronomer might feel looking at a dead star that still emits light. She scanned the perimeter of the room and found him. Julian Croft. He was exactly as his photos suggested. Lean, hungry, looking, with restless eyes that missed nothing. He was standing near the back bar, observing, his journalist's instincts already telling him that the official story of the night was not the real one. The plan was in motion. The evening progressed with agonizing slowness. A series of speakers took the stage, each one painting a more hagiographic portrait of the Thornton family than the last. They spoke of the Thorntons' generosity, their commitment to the city, their unwavering ethical compass. With every word of praise, Alara felt the blade of her purpose grow sharper. Finally, the mayor took the stage to present the award. "And now," he boomed, his voice echoing through the ballroom, "it is my distinct honor to present the Philanthropist of the Year award to a woman whose name is synonymous with legacy and integrity, Mrs. Isabella Thornton." The room rose in a standing ovation. As Isabella ascended the stage, bathed in the warm glow of a spotlight, Alara stood up from her table. "Wish me luck," she whispered to David. She moved with quiet grace, weaving through the tables towards the back of the room where Julian Croft was watching the stage, a look of professional boredom on his face. "Mr. Croft," she said softly. He turned, his eyes instantly analytical. "Do I know you?" "My name is Alara Miller," she said, her voice even. "In approximately 90 seconds, the biggest story of your career is going to break. It will not happen on that stage. It will happen in the palm of every person's hand in this room. I suggest you get your camera ready." She pressed a slim USB drive into his hand. "This is the raw material. The rest of the story is in your inbox. Check the one from Nemesis." Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, melting back towards the side of the ballroom. She took out her phone, her thumb hovering over a single contact. "Go." As Isabella approached the podium, smiling graciously at the adoring crowd, Alara pressed the button. An invisible signal shot through the air. Across the city, at a dozen news desks, an email arrived with a video attachment. Inside the ballroom, a targeted text message was delivered to 200 phones simultaneously, to journalists, to socialites with large online followings, to known rivals of the Thornton empire. The message was simple: the true legacy of the Thornton family. "Watch now." Isabella began her speech. "I am so deeply humbled," she said, her voice radiating warmth and false modesty. "To be a Thornton is to understand that our greatest responsibility is to give back." A strange thing began to happen. A low murmur started near the back of the room. A few people, then a few dozen, looked down at their phones. The polite smiles on their faces froze, replaced by expressions of confusion, then shock, then utter horror. The warm ambient light of the room began to compete with the cold blue glow of hundreds of phone screens. The murmur grew into a wave of whispers, a rising tide of sound that began to lap at the edges of the stage. Isabella faltered, her practiced smile tightening. She could feel the shift in the room's atmosphere. The adoration was curdling into something else. She looked out at the sea of faces, no longer looking at her, but down at the small screens in their hands. Her eyes scanned the room, confused, and then she saw her. Standing in the shadows at the side of the stage, partially obscured by a velvet curtain, was Alara. She wasn't angry. She wasn't crying. She was just watching, her face calm and unreadable. But in her eyes, Isabella saw her damnation. In that single, silent moment of recognition, Isabella Thornton, the untouchable queen, understood everything. She knew who had done this. She knew what was on those screens. The blood drained from her face. It was Julian Croft who lit the final fuse. Seeing his opportunity, he pushed his way to the front, his phone in his hand, and yelled, "What do you have to say about this, Mrs. Thornton?" He held up his phone, and through a small portable speaker he had clipped to his jacket, a voice filled the sudden, tense silence. Her father's voice. "I'm going to the press. This is over." Then, the voice of her dead husband, cold and lethal. "You won't live to see the weekend. I will remove you. I always, always remove my problems." The recording echoed through the grand ballroom, an artifact of death and corruption laid bare in the temple of lies. The room erupted. It was no longer a gala, it was a riot of flashing cameras and shouted questions. People were scrambling away from the Thornton table as if it were radioactive. Liam stood frozen, his face a mask of white, uncomprehending horror. Chloe had crumpled into her chair, her hands over her mouth. On the stage, Isabella Thornton was a statue of ice, her perfect world shattered into a million pieces around her. The cameras swarmed, the reporters a pack of wolves that had just been thrown a feast. Alara watched the chaos for one long, satisfying moment. She saw the empire crumble. She saw the name turn to ash. And then, her work done, she turned and walked away. She slipped out a side door as security rushed in, the sounds of shouting and panic fading behind her. She stepped out into the cool, clean night air, leaving the inferno she had started to burn on its own. The inferno Ilara ignited at the gala became a firestorm. By the time she and David had reached the safety of his quiet apartment, the story was already the lead item on every late-night news broadcast. The video, released into the wild by Julian Croft and amplified by hundreds of gala attendees, had gone supernova. It was a perfect, self-contained narrative of greed, betrayal, and murder that was too sensational to ignore. The next morning, it was as if the world had been remade. The Thornton name was no longer a symbol of wealth and power. It was a brand of pure villainy. News tickers on every major financial network told one part of the story in the cold, brutal language of the market. Thornton Corp., THRN stock, which had closed the previous day at a healthy $150 a share, failed to open. Trading was suspended pending an investigation, but the pre-market value had collapsed by 90%. The empire was already dead on paper. News anchors with grim, serious faces narrated the rest. Headlines screamed from every screen and webpage. Thornton legacy built on blood money? Gala of the damned. Audio recording suggests decades-old murder cover-up that launches immediate investigation into death of architect Mark Miller. The consequences were swift and merciless. The Thornton Foundation's board of directors resigned en masse. The city council voted unanimously to rescind the Philanthropist of the Year award and announced it was renaming every park, library wing, and university hall that bore the toxic Thornton name. Business partners who had been clinking champagne glasses with Isabella a day earlier issued press releases severing all ties, their corporate statements dripping with feigned shock and moral outrage. The edifice of the Thornton dynasty, which had taken 2 generations to build, was dismantled in less than 24 hours. For the individuals at the heart of the storm, the fall was even more personal and far more savage. Isabella Thornton, accustomed to the deferential bubble of the ultra-wealthy, found herself a prisoner in her own mansion. A ravenous pack of paparazzi and news vans camped outside her gates, their long-lens cameras capturing every flicker of movement behind the curtains. 2 days after the gala, the gates were forced open by federal agents. The world watched, live, as Isabella, dressed in a silk pantsuit but with her face a pale, haggard mask, was led from her front door in handcuffs. The woman who had judged Ilara as an unacceptable speck of dust from a lower world was now the subject of public scorn. Her perp walk the ultimate spectacle of her ruin. Chloe's fairy tale ended just as abruptly. The media narrative painted her, largely correctly, as an unwitting victim of her family's sins. Her lawyer released a statement announcing she had filed for an immediate and irrevocable divorce from Liam Miller, citing fraud and emotional distress. She disappeared from public view, seeking refuge from the sins of her father. And then there was Liam. If Isabella's fall was a grand, operatic tragedy, his was a pathetic, quiet implosion. He was fired from Thornton Corp. In a 1-sentence email. He was named in Chloe's divorce petition. He was a man without a job, without a wife, and without a family. The name he had so desperately wanted to be a part of was now a curse, and the name he had discarded was now the one on everyone's lips, linked to his own story of monstrous ingratitude. Julian Croft's Pulitzer-worthy articles had not just detailed the corporate crime, they had told the deeply human story of Ilara's sacrifice and Liam's betrayal. He became a public symbol of moral failure. He was hounded on the street, not just as the son-in-law of a killer, but as the brother who had erased his sister. One viral video showed a reporter shoving a microphone in his face as he tried to leave his now empty condo. Liam, was it worth it? Was the money worth the sister who gave up her life for you? He simply stared, his face a hollow mask of shock and regret, before fleeing into a taxi. He had sold his soul for a kingdom and woken up to find himself a beggar in its ashes. From the calm sanctuary of David's apartment, Ilara watched it all unfold on the television screen. The eviction deadline had passed, and the last of her things were in storage. The house on Elm Street was empty. She felt a profound, quiet sense of finality. It was not joy, it was not triumph. It was the grim satisfaction of a debt finally being paid. She had not sought the spotlight and had refused all interview requests, letting the evidence speak for itself. The world saw her as a hero, a tenacious agent of justice. But she just felt tired. She had avenged her parents, but it would not bring them back. She had exposed the truth, but it had cost her the last remaining piece of her family. A week after the gala, the news reported that the Northgate Plaza, the very building her father had died trying to make safe, had been evacuated and closed indefinitely pending a full structural investigation. It stood now as a monument, not to the Thornton legacy, but to their greed and their fall. The last piece of their empire had been quarantined. The justice Ilara had sought in the court of public opinion had been delivered. The verdict was unanimous. The sentence was total annihilation. The fall was complete. 6 months passed. The seasons changed, and the world, with its voracious appetite for new scandals, moved on. The name Thornton was now a historical footnote, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and business schools. The legal proceedings were a slow, grinding affair, but the outcome was never in doubt. Isabella was convicted, her appeals exhausted before they began. The empire was gone, its assets carved up and sold off to competitors. It was all a distant noise to Ilara now, the fading echo of a war she had already won. She had not returned to the house on Elm Street. After the final box was moved, she had given the keys to David and never looked back. The property, along with other reclaimed assets from the Thornton settlement, was sold. With the proceeds, Ilara did the one thing she felt her parents would have wanted. She established the Miller Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing scholarships and mentorship to children who, like her, had been forced to shoulder adult responsibilities far too young. She found a small, sunlit apartment in a new part of the city and a quiet, purposeful peace she had never known. Her work was her therapy, a way to build a new legacy, one of hope from the ashes of 2 ruined families. She was no longer a ghost haunting a past life. She was the architect of a new one. Liam had tried to reach her. Once a month, like clockwork, a text message would appear from a new, unknown number. The words were always the same, a pathetic mantra of a broken man. "Ilara, I'm sorry. Please. I have nothing left." She would read the message, her expression unchanged, and then she would block the number and delete the thread. There was no anger left, no hatred. There was simply nothing. He was a stranger, and his pleas were letters addressed to a woman who no longer existed. The sister he had betrayed was gone, and the woman who remained owed him nothing, not even her rage. One crisp autumn afternoon, a package arrived from David's office. Inside was a letter, forwarded from Isabella Thornton's legal counsel. Ilara's first instinct was to throw it in the trash. What could the woman who had orchestrated so much of her family's pain possibly have to say? But a cold curiosity, a feeling that one final stone was yet to be turned, stayed her hand. She slit the envelope open. The letter inside was not an apology. It was not a plea for mercy. It was a final, perfectly crafted act of psychological warfare. "Ilara," it began, the handwriting an elegant, sharp script. "I imagine you believe you have won. You have your justice, your pound of flesh, and the adulation of a sentimental public. You have successfully painted your parents as saints and martyrs. But you, like your sainted mother, have built your life on a foundation of lies. You think you know the story of your family, of the boy you sacrificed everything for. You know nothing." Ilara's blood ran cold. She kept reading. "While my lawyers were preparing my defense, they, unlike you, did their research. They dug into every corner of your father's life, searching for leverage. And they found it. Your father, the man of integrity, had his secrets, the deepest of which was the boy you called your brother. Liam is not your brother. He is the bastard son of your father's long-standing affair with his secretary, a woman who died in childbirth. Your sainted mother, in an act of either supreme grace or supreme foolishness, agreed to raise the child of her husband's betrayal as her own, to protect his reputation and the family's perfect image." Ilara's hands began to shake, the letter trembling. Tucked behind the note was another document, a copy of a birth certificate, Liam's. The father's name was Mark Miller. The mother's name was Catherine Alwyn. The world tilted on its axis. The entire history of her life fractured and rearranged itself into a new, terrifying mosaic. Her mother's promise on her deathbed, "Promise me you'll look after your brother," was not just a mother's love for her son. It was the final, desperate act of a woman protecting the legacy of the man who had broken her heart. Her father's integrity was a lie, a public facade hiding a secret that would have ruined him. And Liam was not tied to her by blood, but by a promise to a dying woman to care for the evidence of her husband's greatest sin. The betrayal was deeper, the sacrifice was greater, and the irony was utterly, cruelly perfect. The family she had just avenged was a fiction. The bond she thought was elemental was a construct. And in that horrifying, clarifying moment, Alara felt the last chain break. She had fulfilled her promise to her mother. She had raised the boy. She had delivered justice for the crime that had orphaned them both. Her duty was done. She owed the past nothing more. Never underestimate the silence of a person who has endured too much. Their strength is not in the volume of their roar, but in the finality of their actions when they have given everything and have nothing left to lose. Every family has its secrets, buried under layers of love and duty. And sometimes, the only way to find true freedom is to dig them all up, no matter how painful the truth may be. Thank you for listening. We'll see you again for the next story from GIA.ENHUS.